I'm Angelique Giroux. I'm on the board of the Rocky Mountain State section of the Air and Waste Management Association. Thank you for attending our Lunch and Learn today. We're very excited to have you. Just a couple of quick announcements before I turn it over. We recently hosted our air quality conference in September. So anyone here that was able to attend, thanks so much. And we do have some of the presentations posted on our website. So if anyone's interested, feel free to take a look at that. And we do have some future events getting planned, and we'll have a few more of these lunch and learns on the schedule. Also, just in general, if anyone is interested in presenting, please reach out. We'd love to get you on the schedule for the future. Or if you have any topics you're particularly interested in, we can work on finding a speaker to meet those needs. All right, so today we're going to hear from MaryBeth Clifford. She is an environmental consultant with over a decade of experience in air quality compliance, and she specializes in regulatory frameworks that impact the oil and gas sector. MaryBeth's work focuses on emissions monitoring, regulatory applicability under NSPS, and the implementation of carbon reduction strategies. All right, I will go ahead and hand it over to you, MaryBeth. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Angelique.
Real quick, sorry, if anyone has questions, please put them in the chat, and we'll also save 15 minutes at the end to hear from you. Thanks a lot.
Perfect, thank you. Yeah, so a little bit additional information about myself. I am a Colorado native. I'm very proud to live in this beautiful state. I had 15 years prior to moving over to oil and gas in the energy sector as a teacher. And so I love doing these types of things where I get to share information and we get to have a conversation and learn together. So love the opportunity to do this with you all today. I have been with Protect for 1 year. We do have a wide variety of services across not just oil and gas, but other industries as well. We have a reliability division with multiple services, and then we have our risk and compliance division, which is the team that I work on in the environmental department. And then we support all sorts of other things like leak detection and repair, safety, industrial hygiene, etc. For today's webinar, we're going to be focusing in on fugitive emissions monitoring, especially as it pertains to upstream oil and gas. And for just a quick agenda of what we're going to go through, we'll look at just the basics of our monitoring requirements and figuring out the applicability, definitions, frequency, get on the same page with that. And then what are some really practical ways we can manage the LDAR schedule as we have diverse requirements? How can we maximize an LDAR program? And then get into a bunch of different monitoring methods, record keeping, reporting, common gaps that I've seen working with different LDAR programs and helping perform audits. And then, yes, we'll leave a good amount of time at the end for Q&A. Feel free to drop those questions in the chat as we go. And then I'll get Angelique to help me get those questions answered. I had put this abstract together to do this presentation quite a long time ago. And since then, there have been a lot of changes that have come up with the new administration, a lot of them being driven by the different executive orders, especially the one unleashing energy, which has caused reconsiderations to be taking place with the EPA. And so I can no longer just like present what I'm used to presenting because there's a lot of things that are kind of in flux. And so I wanted to touch on those as it pertains to our topic for today. So what's changed and what could change under NSPS Quad OB for the fugitive monitoring. There's also lots of other items under consideration within that regulation, but for fugitive emissions monitoring at well sites, production facilities, and compressor stations, nothing's changed. despite the reconsiderations, the interim final rule, for the purposes of those upstream sites, the rule is in effect and enforceable. And so you need to be following the fugitive monitoring sections of that regulation as they are. There are some changes for natural gas processing plants, which we're not going to be going into in depth in this presentation, with some delays around repair requirements. There's also delays around the CVS, the closed vent system, and covers inspection requirements, pushing those out till 2027. And then the big one that does kind of impact everything is the super emitter program implementation has been delayed. They've decided they don't have a sufficient framework to implement that the way it should be done. And so they're continuing to work on that. And so the actual implementation of it has been postponed. And then one of the most recent ones to come up just a month ago in September is a proposed rule. In essence, it's going to get rid of the greenhouse gas reporting program with the 46 different subparts, with the exception of subpart W, because subpart W is called out in the Inflation Reduction Act and is also tied to the waste emissions charge. And so that one can't be completely revoked because of the other precedents for that part, but they're proposing to delay reporting until 2034. The challenge here is this is a proposed rule, so it's not in effect. It is not something that we can count on, and it won't even be finalized in 2025. It's currently still in the public comment period. And so we won't actually know until after this reporting year has ended whether or not data will need to be reported for 2025 or not. So I'm really recommending for everyone keep it business as usual, just to make sure that you have the data that's needed to submit a 2025 report, should that still be required. So taking a look at federal requirements, and then we're going to kind of, I took Colorado to kind of pair up with things because Colorado has some of the more stringent LDAR requirements. But it's really important to just kind of know where your facilities bucket. And I'm a highly visual person, so this chart really helps me to be able to see, okay, which bucket does my facility belong to? What are my applicability trigger dates? And so you can use this as kind of a quick guide to which one am I triggering, which will help you then know what your frequencies and your monitoring requirements are going to be. Oh, are you not seeing the slides moving?
We could see your mouse and the slide. Is it
monitoring requirements?
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry, I was seeing a comment that it looked like they were not moving. Maybe there's maybe just a little bit of a delay. So taking a quick look then at monitoring requirements for Colorado, and there's actually a proposed rule currently that they're hoping to finalize in February of 2026. That's in essence incorporating a lot of the Quad OC requirements to align Reg 7 with Quad OC. But this is probably really the most complex applicability assessment that has to be done, in my estimation, as far as what your LDAR requirements are. So apart from also getting into the weeds of including facility construction dates, etc., the easiest is just to kind of go with the more stringent aspect to put it in a single table. But as you can see, the frequencies really vary from anywhere from annual to monthly inspections based on location of the facility, construction of the facility, potential to emit. And so this also has to be taken into consideration along with your federal requirements in putting together your LDAR program. And so you could be looking at, quite the variety of different frequencies when we match that up with some of the federal requirements. And then here's compressor stations and centralized oil stabilization facility, which is a unique one to Colorado. And that one really only applies in the non-attainment area and North Weld. Coming back then to the federal side of things, one of the other aspects that you really have to be confident on and have an understanding of are the definitions of the different facility types. And again, this is Colorado's working on aligning with some changes that they're making, because Colorado refers to well production sites, and that encompasses quite a number of different facility types. And then EPA in their Quad A and Quad B actually have two different sets of definitions around a well site as well. And so knowing that is important, because then you need to know what's triggering some modification for the purposes of your monitoring. Like, are you still in the Quad A bucket, or are you now in the Quad B bucket? And knowing what your facility type is so that you can make those determinations. And just to show those differences side by side, you know, on the left-hand side is the definition of a well site for Quad A. It's very broad and encompassing, similar to Colorado's well production site. And then on the right, Quad B really breaks it down, and that plays into your frequency for your monitoring. And then also within your reporting, you have to identify what kind of a well site it is, so that they can pair those things up with your frequencies. I will say one of the trickier ones to keep straight is this well site with major production and processing equipment in conjunction with the new centralized production facility. And while a lot of the requirements are very similar between those two facilities, the big thing in knowing which is which is a centralized production facility does not have any wells on site, which you could have basically all the same equipment at this well site with major production and processing equipment and a CPF, but the difference is that there's no wells located on site at a CPF. It's just receiving product from off-site gas or oil wells. So getting into a little bit more of a visual now as we look at it, here's where, like I said, those definitions really play a part in what our frequencies are. So Quad A, simple definition of a well site, very straightforward. You either had semi-annual or you have quarterly monitoring. And so putting that schedule together is pretty straightforward. It wasn't all that complicated. And then Quad B has really added to the complexity, because it's no longer just an OGI inspection. Now you have to do AVO, auditory, visual, olfactory inspections, and OGI inspections. And so putting the schedule together has become a lot more complex, and making sure that you're not missing any inspection events in there. And so you can see here that here's the AVOs, here's the OGIs, and we're looking at anything from monthly to quarterly or quarterly to semi-annual under Quad B for our monitoring frequencies for AVOs and OGI. So pulling in, you know, we looked at that Colorado applicability along with the Quad AB applicabilities. So when you take a look at these and kind of put them side by side, since you're trying to harmonize programs, this helps you see, okay, what is my most stringent requirement, so that I can start mapping out a schedule that's going to ensure I'm compliant with both my state and my federal requirements. And Colorado also has AVO requirements, and for the most part, those are all monthly. It is interesting to note that compressor stations don't actually have a specified AVO frequency. It's been my general practice to recommend doing the monthly AVOs just as best practice, and for that additional coverage. And then, as you saw, we also have anything from a monthly to an annual OGI inspection. And so you are more than likely going to be looking at a schedule based on Colorado regulations to have the most stringent monitoring frequency. And in so doing, you'll be in compliance then with your federal requirements. But these are the things that you have to line up side by side in order to make sure you don't have gaps in that program, and make sure that you've done a thorough regulatory applicability assessment and are have everything bucketed correctly, both at a federal level and then also at a state level. This gets really into the weeds, and this is the fun part as a consultant to put these things together and then to also provide tools for doing this. And so you may have already done something similar, but again, as a very visual person, it's really helpful to be able to see. And we all know that these things are flexible and do have to change as you bring new wells on and you try and keep schedules aligned. Weather events happen. You have shutdowns and things like that that prevent you from doing inspections on the frequency that you would normally do them. But generally speaking, it's best to go ahead and map out what does it look like across all of my assets. And so this is just a sample of the exercise and how to go through it. This is the most impactful schedule that there could possibly be, maximum number of inspections. Under Quad OB, with the auditory, visual, olfactory requirements, you have the opportunity to substitute OGI or other inspection methods for that. You don't have to do the AVO. And so there is benefit to utilizing this. This initial scenario 1 considers the maximum number of inspections, that you're doing all of the prescribed AVOs and all of the prescribed OGI inspections. Up here in the blue, these are your Quad OA facilities. And then the second part in this list is it a semi-annual or a quarterly inspection? And then what is your inspection type? So Quad OA does not require AVO, it only requires OGI. So that's how to interpret these facilities. And then below we have Quad OB. And then again, the middle is the frequency of the inspection and then the inspection type. So we have AVO and then we have our frequency type again, plus our OGI. So to get those all mapped out. And so this is what it could look like. This is just an example where you're doing the maximum number of inspections. You know, with your monthly AVO plus your quarterly OGI, you would be doubled up in some months to have all of those covered. I don't know of any operators that are doing this approach because there are the opportunities to optimize your schedule by using OGI in place of AVOs. And so that gets you into scenario B, where you're doing maybe some in-house OGI, and then you're using your operations for your AVOs. And so you're going to count some of your OGIs towards your AVO requirements in this scenario, and you can start to see the schedule declutter a little bit. But again, you know, especially where you have those bi-monthly AVOs and your quarterly OGIs, making sure that you're hitting that OGI inspection each quarter, each calendar quarter, and then making sure that you have an equivalent of an AVO on a bi-monthly basis, so 1 every 2 months. So it does make for kind of a weird looking schedule to make sure that you're checking all of those boxes appropriately to hit that bi-monthly AVO and quarterly OGI frequency. That's the most complicated one. And this is where I've seen the most issues with scheduling and with missed inspections. And then you also have the opportunity or the scenario of substituting all OGI. And so that's what this would look like if you're going to, instead of AVO, just go with a straight up OGI solution to handle all of your monitoring requirements. And here, because you're deploying people to the field, you do want to work hard to make sure that you have everything lined up and that you're maximizing things and reducing windshield time wherever possible. Then scenario D, this is operators are starting to be able to roll this out and use this with the adoption or with the approval of the advanced technology methods that are being approved by EPA, ATMs, as an alternative monitoring. And we're going to get into the kind of the nitty-gritty details of making sure that you're checking the right boxes here. But as far as putting together a schedule where you're going to use an ATM in place of OGI or AVO, because it is an approved alternative monitoring method, it can meet the requirement for your AVO and or your OGI monitoring requirements. And this is one of the most, this creates a very streamlined look and approach to your monitoring, as you can see, and reduces significant amounts of windshield time. So some things that do need to be taken into consideration now that we have approved technologies with EPA that can be used for the alternative monitoring is, what does that look like at a state level? Yes, it checks the box federally, but what things do we need to take into consideration for our state compliance? So Colorado and New Mexico both actually have their own application and approval process for alternative monitoring. Colorado's is under their alternative AIM application, approved instrument monitoring method. And there are several technologies that have already received that approval through Colorado as well. And so, you know, look to see if the one that you're using at a federal level is also approved in Colorado, and that box might already be checked for you. And in essence, you don't need to do anything else. You're good to move forward and have that monitoring that's done check the box for Colorado as well as for the federal requirements. New Mexico has its approval process too. Currently, there's only one approved technology in New Mexico. I do know that they have quite a number that are currently being reviewed and that they're hoping to start issuing those approvals the end of October. And then we'll continue to be working through those applications for approvals. My experience with Wyoming, keeping this all like Rocky Mountain area, is that they really haven't made any moves for a process that would allow for advanced technologies. And so I know the operators that I've been working with have reached out and asked, and they're just not really getting anything to help move that process forward of compliance with Quad OB equaling compliance with Wyoming LDAR requirements. If any of you have had other experiences or have a good contact, that would definitely be beneficial information that you could post in the chat for all of us. But that's generally speaking been my experience thus far in trying to help operators make sure that they're complying both state and federal. The other thing that you need to take a look at is what is written into your permit. And so this is especially at the upstream sites, we're not usually worried about Title V. Those are all typically minor source or synthetic minor source. And so we're not dealing with Title V permits, but we might have a construction or an operating permit that has very specific requirements spelled out in it. And just making sure that there's not going to be any conflicts with using an ATM as approved by EPA. So you may need to look at coordinating with your regulator to do permit revisions if necessary to make that happen, but don't make any assumptions. This is where you don't want to assume anything and then be caught off guard and have gaps in your compliance. And so do your due diligence as you implement these things to ensure full compliance with all state and federal regulations. So in getting into like maximizing an LDAR program, there's so much more to just your fugitive emissions that you can check the box when you're out there doing an OGI inspection. And so one of those under Quad OB is the compressor rod packing monitoring that needs to be done on an annual basis for your centralized production facilities and your compressor stations. And so that process begins with using OGI. And so you can have that be part of one of your inspections that's done annually, is to take a look at the rod packing and see if you're detecting any emissions coming off of those. If there are no emissions, you can assume, as per the regulation, that the flow rate is 0 and check the box that you've done that annual monitoring and you're good to go. If you are seeing emissions with that OGI survey, then you need to follow up with a flow rate measurement, and then also ensure that you've done any maintenance and repair within 90 days. And so that OGI inspection starts the clock ticking on your 90 days. But it's a great way to start that process of, do we even need to do a flow rate measurement or not? And then also covers and closed vent systems have inspection requirements that are to be done at the same frequency as your OGI and AVO or alternative tech. These are, there's a little bit of ambiguity around these because there are aspects to this that has been delayed. And the part that's been delayed is the no identifiable emissions. They're still recommending doing the inspections, but that the standard of it being a deviation if there's identifiable emissions is been postponed until 2027. So some unique nuances there, but you can combine those things together and make sure that you're inspecting your covers and closed vents at the same time that you're doing all of your fugitives. And then one of the benefits used to be that every documented AVO or OGI Method 21 inspection is a bookend for a super emitter event, but that program is currently delayed. So, but it will still helpful to have that information for the purposes of emissions, inventories, and calculations. And I would say, we're all still, in addition to our federal requirements and our state requirements, a lot of us participate in voluntary programs and voluntary certifications, whether it's like OGMP 2.0, MIQ, TrustWell. And so these LDAR surveys that we're doing not only meet our requirements for federal and state regulations and compliance, but can assist us in achieving those voluntary GHG certifications. The thing is that you do need to know what the inspection frequency is required by that program in order for it to count towards that certification and doing your top-down, bottom-up reconciliations or your mass balance and things like that. But there's definitely ways that you can make sure that you're optimizing that data for more than just your regulatory compliance. Monitoring methods. We're all really familiar with OGI, optical gas imaging, since that's been the standard method for upstream oil and gas since the implementation of Quado A. It is important to note, I actually get a lot of questions about whether or not we need to do Appendix K at our upstream sites or not. And so that is a no. Appendix K only applies to natural gas processing plants. And the specs for the camera are actually different under your 60, 53, 97 A and B from the camera specs under Appendix K. And so here I do have the definition for you of what your camera needs to be capable of imaging, just so that there's no confusion there. Your traditional OGI camera meets these EPA requirements, whether it's a FLIR, an OpGal, an Aura, Konica Minolta, Sierra Ventus. You know, there's so many different cameras out there now, and this is a pretty standard thing that they come with this verification. And then you also have the opportunity to do Method 21. I know there's a couple of operators that go this route for their monitoring of their upstream sites. It's cumbersome, but it is an allowed method. AVOs, this is an important part under the new Quado B regulations, is to realize that there are actually some specific requirements to when you do those inspections, that if you have tanks or separators on those sites, you must include an inspection of the thief hatches and the dump valves. And that needs to be documented in your record keeping. A lot of state AVO programs don't actually specify that. And so it's kind of a loosey-goosey, walk the site, look, smell, observe, listen, but not super prescriptive as to how you go about that. Quado B is saying you have to inspect your thief hatches and your dump valves and document that in your record keeping. And then you have alternative technologies. These do have to be approved by EPA, and then they would also need to be approved at a state level, or if the state doesn't have a specific monitoring program, you would want to work with them to ensure that it meets the requirements. Periodic monitoring, we have our different frequencies there. And so you saw this when I did the other chart. So in order to use this, you would need to use one of the frequencies that's specified in the table 1 or table 2, depending on what your site triggers. You're looking at a minimum, a quarterly or a semi-annual, depending on the site, monitoring frequency, potentially as frequent as monthly. And that's all based on the minimum detection thresholds of the technology itself as to what the frequency needs to be in order to demonstrate an equivalence to doing handheld ground surveys. Continuous monitoring, we're just going to kind of gloss over this because EPA has decided that there's not a clear path for them to approve continuous monitoring methods at this time. And so they actually had all of their continuous monitoring applications pull those back and resubmit them as periodic monitoring. So you will actually see a lot of approved technologies that you would consider to be a continuous monitoring method, but they are approved as a periodic monitoring method currently under EPA. Record keeping. I would say this is probably one of the most important aspects to a quality LDAR program is your record keeping, because you're working across so many different departments and even third parties. Having well-documented SOPs and good data repositories and is critical to an LDAR program. From a Quad A, Quad B perspective, there's just some basic record keeping requirements, not specific to the inspections themselves, but more specific to the company or the facility, how you're doing your monitoring, like what method you're using, etc. And so this outlines what those requirements are for you. And then more nitty gritty, you have your survey details, and there's a lot of pieces of information that need to be captured with every single survey that is performed. If you're doing these in-house and you have your own LDAR technicians, it's important that you have a very clear SOP and outline all of the items that need to be documented with every survey that's completed. If you're outsourcing and using a third party, you are the one who holds the compliance obligation. So it's critical that you review their procedures and make sure that they are providing you with all of the records that you need to demonstrate compliance so that your record keeping is complete. And then if you're going to utilize an alternative technologies, there are some additional and unique record keeping requirements. And so again, this is where you would need to really partner well with your alternative technology provider. Now, it should be noted that each one of these providers has been thoroughly reviewed by EPA. And so their method and their record keeping has been reviewed and has passed muster with EPA. It's checked the boxes, but it is still your responsibility as the operator to ensure that you are actually receiving those records from them for so that you have that complete data set should you need it for demonstrating compliance. And then I think one of the most commonly overlooked things that I see in LDAR programs is a monitoring plan. These are required by both Quad A and Quad B, and several different state programs also require them. And really and truly, it's just best practice, even if it wasn't required, because it's the backbone for your LDAR program. It's the thing that spells out all of the parts and pieces and the how, and allows for that cohesiveness from identifying the applicability to the frequencies, to the actual surveys themselves, to the leak repair management, the closing out of leak repairs, the reporting. It encompasses all of those pieces. It's really helpful to bring everyone from all the different departments together to understand the bigger picture of an LDAR program as well. I highly recommend that these be reviewed or updated at least annually. And if you haven't done this since Quad B took effect, that's something that you should definitely look at. Another good time to review these is after an acquisition or a divestment of facilities, because part of the monitoring plan needs to be a comprehensive list of the facilities and their applicability and their frequency. And then if you're utilizing an alternative technology, there are additional requirements that need to be in your monitoring plan or plans if you choose to do them separately. And lastly, I would be remiss if I didn't discuss the annual reporting. This is yet another challenging piece to the differences between Quad A and Quad B, in that the reporting periods do not align in any way, shape, or form. They also released a new version of the Quad A report template in July, a year ago, July 2024. And so of the multiple tabs within those reports, as they cover much more than just your fugitives, 10 of those tabs pertain to your fugitives monitoring and alternative technology in Quad OA, and 11 of them in the Quad OB report. So that's a pretty substantial portion of the report is based on your fugitive emissions program and the documentation around that. And so that also is a great starting point as well when you're reviewing your record keeping, is to look at the report and what data needs to be captured in the report. Your record keeping goes above and beyond what goes into the report, but a good starting place is to make sure that you're actually capturing the data that you would need to put your report together on an annual basis. And I do recommend, don't wait until you've hit the end of your reporting period to do any kind of QA/QC or investigation into the record keeping. I recommend doing that on at least a quarterly basis to make sure that the data is being collected and documented and there's no gaps. And also, if there's any deviations or questions about the data, it's a lot easier to follow up on that sooner rather than later. Gaps. I've mentioned a few of these. I've done a number of different audits and have assisted operators in preparation for audits. And so one of the common gaps that I see is missing records for repair attempts and verifications. And so this is challenging because operations doesn't always realize that when they turn a wrench or they replace a thief hatch, that they need to notify you that that was done so that you can document it and add it to your overall record keeping. Another one is missed inspections. Either they weren't scheduled or they were incorrectly scheduled or they were missed. And this has become more complex with the addition of the AVOs in the scheduling. Another challenge that I've seen is operations does a repair and they remove the physical tag from the field before a technician has been able to get out there and verify the leak repair. So then the technician goes out and they can't find where the leak was. So having a clear path of understanding as to what leak repairs look like and having an SOP around that so that you don't run into those challenges. Incomplete records for DORs. We all have had to place something on DOR, but do you have the correct information and all of the supporting details that you need for that? Outdated and missing monitoring plans are another one that I see on a pretty regular basis. One of the ones that I heard from some operators when we had the discussion around the new AVO requirements was, oh, well, our operations do an AVO every single day. And we had to, well, great. I'm glad they do. That's a great best practice, but is it documented? Because if it's not documented, then in the regulator's mind, it never happened. And so if you're doing things that could be used as a demonstration of compliance, make sure that they're documented so that you have that when the time comes. And with that, oh, look at that, right at 12:45. Awesome. Questions?
Thank you, MaryBeth. That was really informative. I really feel like you distilled a lot of really complicated issues all down, and it was very clear. So thank you so much. Yeah, I'll open it up to questions from the audience. If anyone would like to ask a question, feel free to come off mute or throw your question in the chat.
Would you like me to make this slide deck available to send out?
Sure, yeah, we can send it out and post it on our website. We've got a section for references in there. So we'll put a recording of this on the website and then put the slide deck with it.
Perfect, yep. I'll get you a PDF of that then.
Great, thank you.
I know, it was a lot to cram into 45 minutes, so I do apologize.
I mean, looking through those regulations, I feel like they're trying to confuse you. So thank you. All right. Well, if no one's got any questions, we'll go ahead and end a few minutes early here. But thanks everybody for joining.
Thank you.